Tell me this. What kind of leader is President Obama contrasting with what kind of leader Vladimir Putin is?
Putin's an incredibly aggressive leader. He looks for and exploits weakness in others. He's devoted to projecting an image of strength at all times. That's why you have the photos of Putin fishing shirtless, riding horses, practicing judo. Strength is very much at the core of his leadership philosophy. Whereas I think Obama, the core of his leadership philosophy is intellect, moderation, and reason, which I think in a world in which, at the University of Chicago, for example, where he was a law professor, it's a very fine mode of leadership. It's a mode of leadership that gets into trouble when faced with a world in which you have, Putin's and Iranian ayatollahs and others with whom you have to intersect. And in this case, I think he got into the same problem that he did in Syria, which is not really thinking about how to match his desired ends to the means that he's willing to employ. In Syria, he laid down a very clear red line that Assad then trod all over, and the U.S. ended up doing basically nothing. With Putin, he threatened consequences as Putin moved troops into the Ukraine, and it's going to be difficult to deliver those consequences. Now, the State Department's already been talking about applying sanctions to Russia. We'll see if at the end of the day there are some consequences, but I think he puts a bit too much emphasis on his powers of persuasion.
Okay, now, I think what you said, I can understand what you said. I just look at, yeah, he's brilliant. I'm told, President Obama, a very smart guy. I'm always told that about people to the left who have these points of view. I don't know how smart you can be by not recognizing reality. And in what you've just described to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that he's deluded. Am I wrong?
That he's deluded?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't at all agree with that characterization. Look, my point was that there are areas where his view doesn't intersect with reality. I mean, if that means that he's deluded, then you can put that word into my mouth. But I think that the same thing was most definitely true of the Bush administration. Look, they have two different approaches to U.S. power. Obama is extraordinarily hesitant to utilize it, with exceptions. Bush was very eager to utilize it. Both of them have had problems in terms of how they relate to the rest of the world in that regard. The Bush administration was overeager. You and I have talked about Iraq endlessly, but I think it's becoming clear at this point that the Iraq War was not in the U.S. interest. I mean, we're over 10 years past the start of the Iraq War, and it was extraordinarily bad for this country, and we lost many lives in the process of executing it.
Do you want me to stop you there and debate that, or not? Because I would say, go ahead, finish your point. Finish your point. Yes, pardon me. Go ahead, sir.
I'm going to compare it to Obama. And then we can debate Iraq if you'd like. But
okay.
To compare it to Obama, Obama is much more speak, don't use power. Don't employ U.S. power, again, with some exceptions, like the U.S. drone campaign. And that also raises its own set of problems. I think there are two ends of the spectrum, and neither one got it right. Does that make Obama deluded? I wouldn't use that term, but I mean, what I have offered is a critique of the administration, one that says that the job that they're doing in this regard is an awfully negative job.
Okay, now.
If you want to do Iraq, I'm all.
No. I would. It's just the time we have, and I don't want. I would just merely say that we would have to outline what exactly we're debating in the sense of what was the intent, how it was followed through, what my goal would be in the sense of that, and what followed with our schizophrenic policy when it comes to foreign policy, as we have in this country, because we do have free elections. Amen. Love it. But very different points of view on foreign policy come in, and some things are what you start out with, and especially a war, once the boots hit the ground, everything changes. So, there's a lot there. But I just want it noted that I am not agreeing with your characterization of Iraq for further debate later at a later time. Okay, would that be good?
Sure, sure. Look, I'm
Yes.
happy to debate that anytime.
Oh no, I am too. I just want to say
You and I have been
to
debating this
President.
for essentially 9 years now, right? I mean, the first time I was on with you was it 2005 when I first started on with you?
Oh, it was
I
earlier
think it
than
was
that.
2005.
Yeah. Okay. I thought
No,
it was a little
it wasn't earlier than '05 because I was never on with you before I moved to BC. I moved to BC in September 2005, and I think that I actually was on with you for the first time shortly after I moved here. So I think we've been like doing interviews and talking.
I thought
for about 9
were
years.
you in New York before you were in D.C.? Now I'm going to debate you on this. What were you in New York or Virginia
I was,
before
yeah,
DC?
yeah.
You were in New York. I just remember. Okay, but that aside, well, with
I mean,
that
look,
noted,
either way, though, it wouldn't have been before '05
okay,
because I was in New York for a 6-month period between March and September of 2005. Before that, I was in D.C. The earliest you could have possibly interviewed me would have been late 2004. Before that, I was not in the public sphere.
okay,
So
I gotcha.
it actually had to have been 2005.
I was thinking it was late 2004 when I got the gig at 97.1 in the morning originally, and then I was calling you. But maybe I'm wrong. But I think this is fascinating for our listeners because now we're talking like school kids about when our relationship started.
All I'll say is that we've been talking for about 9 years, and just for the context of your listeners, Crane, you and I used to have very long debates about the Iraq War. This was at a time where your view represented the majority view among conservatives. Most conservatives, most people on the right, thought that the Iraq War was a positive thing. I was not in that camp.
No, you're not.
You and I had a lot of areas where we agreed strongly about foreign policy. Both of us saw the fight against Al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups as important. We shared a lot of basic paradigmatic similarities, with you being quite a bit more hawkish than I was. But one kind of lesson here, look, and kudos, I guess, to you for staking out your position and sticking to it. But you'll see, like you can see on the right, you have a lot of people who were where you were in 2005, who have quietly kind of regressed to a different position. I'm still where I was then.
I know, and at the time,
more.
I got to tell you, kudos to you at the time because you were sitting there and you were outlining the case that you had made, and you saw what was unfolding as things drifted, if you will, and you have stuck to your point of view. So you've been intellectually honest from day one, and I appreciate that. I do want to steer back just real quick, though, to the idea that, okay, deluded or self-deceived, is he believing something that is not true? Is he a fool?
Oh, yeah.
President Obama,
I've already said that. I think that he's believing something that is not true.
Right. And I believe there are leaders that have done this. I don't want to make this purely about President Obama. I think when President Bush went with Pooty Poot and understood, I think obviously I don't want to make it about Obama per se. I do want to address the fact that if you don't recognize evil and human nature, and you are willfully blind to the realities on the ground, that makes you a very dangerous man if you're president of the United States and ostensibly leader of the free world, and you've got Ukrainians sitting there going, hey, they're taking the Crimea, and you may not realize this, but you've advanced a reset button, and they're not playing by the rules. And by the way, this is not uncommon behavior. We've seen the kind of behavior in Georgia. We see something greater at play. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, the area where I disagree there, I agree with part of what you're saying. I think that not understanding the world as it is a dangerous thing for a president of the United States, full stop. But for Ukraine and Crimea, I don't see much that the United States could actually do to hold Russia back. I think that had Obama not had a red line trod over by Assad, then Putin would have more to worry about because the U.S.'s bluff wouldn't have been called. But I think that he still would almost certainly do this. And a good example, Crane, is Georgia 2008 with Russia rolling in there. That was under the Bush administration's watch.
Yes.
And similarly, the United States really didn't have anything to say about that.
Did we have
right?
didn't President Bush invite the leader to the White House, if I'm not mistaken? The
Well,
president of,
when I say nothing to say about that, I don't
yes,
mean that
yes,
we literally said nothing. I mean, there
right.
were things that we did. Just like here, the State Department has said it's going to sanction Russia.
Hmm.
We seemingly are going to pull out of the G8 summit. But my point is that these aren't like responses that are going to give Putin nightmares. These are largely cosmetic responses and symbolic responses. And I think ultimately, like regardless of how much of a cold, hard realpolitik view the president has, the U.S. would be very hard pressed to respond in a way that would end with Russia not rolling its troops into the Ukraine.
Tell me this, David, because again, we're starting where President Obama is now, as opposed to where we were before he was president, and what he has articulated throughout his presidency, which is bailing on the Poles and the Czech Republic, bailing on, I would argue, Israel, and being critical of Israel, and putting in, and I mean, 67 borders. I mean, the fact that he has looked at the world and reached out to the quote reformer Rouhani. We look at what has taken place in the status of forces agreement, diplomatic status. That's what they could have offered them, and put troops under diplomatic status. Could have protected them. Could have assured that. We have, as you mentioned, the Syrian red line. There's no red line. There's no consequence. So we've gotten here. I just look for, if anything, I'm not disagreeing with you on what we can do right now to prevent what Vladimir Putin has done. I think we can do other things to prevent a further incursion, if you will. That said, when is this president going to shift his worldview to the reality and start articulating a message of freedom and consequences that are backed up by action? I remember Reagan came in and we're going to start treating our allies as our allies and our enemies as our enemies was one of his lines. Of course, I butchered that line. You could probably do it verbatim for me. But there was a change, certain change in the vision and also what our president understood about America's role in the world. I think everybody's looking for that right now. Your thoughts?
Well, here's the fundamental challenge of U.S. foreign policy for the next decade plus. It is the challenge of operating in a severely resource-constrained environment in which U.S. power has eroded substantially compared to where it was in 2000 or 2001. And as a result, we can articulate. In fact, Obama did articulate a vision of consequences previously. It's just when that vision was called, there were no consequences. I'm talking about the Syrian red line. I mean, he very clearly threw down a red line. And it was also clear that the administration wanted to use military action. It was also clear they wanted the military action, in Secretary Kerry's words, to be unbelievably small. But it's a problem, Crane, that you're going to have with any president, the fact that you have to match means to ends. And Obama doesn't have it right. He has it wrong. Like, he talks big, and when his bluff is called, everyone sees that he's bluffing time and time again. That's why Putin isn't scared at all when President Obama, the president of the most powerful country in the world, talks about there being consequences when Russia deploys its troops to Ukraine. So to that extent, you're absolutely right. It's just I think that you're making it too simple. I think that actually this is a significant problem.
Yes.
And one of the things that the U.S. is going to have to do is to retrench a bit. In my view, like, what the president needs to do is not talk as tough. But when a line is crossed, we absolutely have to take action, period. For that reason, we have to be careful in throwing down lines.
I agree in a sense with you. I don't think it's merely about taking action, to be clear. I think it's about the foundational message that he went with from day one, which is almost what has been characterized, and I have characterized it at times as an apology tour, but his actions over that time, like embracing Morsi, for example, or reaching out to Rouhani, to me, has undermined what we are, which is the leader of the free world, and using the power of the bully pulpit as Reagan did, and he synthesized that with the church. Certainly,
what do you think about Morsi? I mean, what? And look, and let me be clear. I have a large number of lines of critique of how the Obama administration related to the Muslim Brotherhood, but I'm interested in what your critique is, because
identify what the
with Morsi, the problem was and what the Obama administration did there.
Well, there's a number of problems. One, to identify the project and what the project stated, I believe in 1979 or 81, in their overall grand plan of the Muslim Brotherhood, to use means to an end in any way they can to gain power and then impose their worldview, their vision on the world. They're not believers in freedom and democracy. I would also say that once you saw Morsi's behavior, you immediately held him to account and would not block Congress from doing so. And when the Egyptian people rose up and said, hey, we've had enough of this guy, to say, wait a second, we're not going to embrace somebody who believes in elections, but won election one time and then tries to establish dictatorial powers. I think we stand up for people who believe in freedom in that general sense, but we articulate what the message is, and we demand that of people we support. And so in that particular case, with Morsi, that's how I would have dealt with him in a general case. I mean, we get more specific, go ahead.
And the administration did a bit of that, right? At the front end, they were very slow to recognize the authoritarian impulses that Morsi had. Right? I mean, their view on Egypt basically after
just to tell you right now, and not because I want to run out the clock on you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. And this happened to us a lot before, David. But
it seems like this was a longer interview than usual, at any rate. And
yes, thank you for taking the time. Thank you, buddy.
All right.
I appreciate it. Sorry we didn't have it. Absolutely. Brain Durham's Nothing But Truth. I want to thank David Gartenstein-Ross. Absolute class act. So well informed and a great guy overall. Check out Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I'll post a link up for you all. Now that we're out of time, I think David and I we should just start debating from the get-go and go from there. He would love that too. Brilliant. I learn a lot from him. Brain Durham's Nothing But Truth. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart. Go to the Facebook page. Always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. AFR.